Dallas crossed cultural boundaries, so it didn't matter where in the world you lived.
This was a high-powered, extra-strength soap opera.
People would stay home intentionally on Friday night.
If Dallas is remembered for nothing else, forget Who Shot JR, forget the fact that it was about number one in the ratings for about 7 years or close thereof, forget any of that stuff. Dallas really did television art a great favor by convincing network executives that people could actually remember what had happened from week to week and would continue to watch shows in a serialized sort of way. Dallas figured out that this was the thing that could make television more exciting than anything else. But amazingly, it took a long time for the nighttime to figure out how to do this.
Well, the concept of a nighttime soap opera had kind of been abandoned in the 1960s after Peyton Place. Soap operas became daytime serials. CBS and Leonard Katzman thought that they could revive the concept of a nighttime soap opera with Dallas. They very much believed in the project.
This was a type of television that actually required a little more engagement on the part of the viewers because it was continuing on. You did have to remember what had happened before.
When the show started, it was on a very low budget, and it was filmed in the wintertime in Dallas, and it showed that. It was bleak. The 1970s were about the oil crisis, the Iran crisis, Jimmy Carter and his cardigan sweaters. It was much more of a modest Ewing family that initially was shown.
Your folks are gonna throw me right off that ranch.
Relax, honey. You're my wife now. Your family. You are a Ewing.
It's supposed to be centered around Bobby and Pam, and Pam came from the wrong side of the tracks, and Bobby was the fair-haired boy who was going to inherit, the Ewing fortune because he was the nice brother. It was going to center around those two as a Romeo and Juliet type of theme.
I underestimated the new Mrs. Ewing. Well, I surely won't do that again.
JR kind of took over the show because he's a nasty son of a gun, but there's something appealing about JR too. There was a twinkle in his eye, almost a wink at the camera, if you will, where he knew he was a nasty son of a gun and played that up very much to popular appeal.
Dallas gets kind of a slow start. I think it starts in April, which is not even kind of the mid-season, whatever. It gets dropped in April of 1978. Not on in its Friday slot yet. I think it was Sunday and then moved to Saturday. A lot of shows would start this way. But in that little mini season that it did pretty well. Not huge stop the presses kind of hit, but it did okay. And then it comes back September of 1978 for its first full season. I think by the end of its second full season, it was up to like number 6 in the ratings. Which is good. That's a hit, top 10 program.
And then in 1980, it found a spot in Friday evening, and from there, it became a cultural phenomenon. It stayed at that spot and became appointment television, where people would stay home on a Friday night to watch Dallas.
Oh, I've learned in this business, you have to roll with punches.
Yeah, you know what I think people forget about Dallas is now, people have got their favorite shows, and they can capture it any number of ways. They've either got a VCR or they can push their TiVo button. When Dallas comes out in 1978, the VCR had been invented, but virtually nobody had one back then, which means this was still that amazing era when a television show played, and it played once, and then months later in rerun. If you didn't watch it, that was tough luck. So if you had a show that you really liked, you had to make sure you were there when it was on. And Dallas was one of those things. It got tens of millions of Americans who under normal circumstances would have been at the movies, out to dinner, on a date, living a normal life as a human being on a Friday night. It got them to stay home so they could watch Dallas. And of course then, at the end of the 79-80 season, we have the cliffhanger of all cliffhangers, the mother of all cliffhangers, which is the Who Shot JR episode.
He's got to be stopped.
I've put up with all the wheeling and dealing and backstabbing that I'm going to.
I can't rely on anyone else to do what I have to do.
even if you weren't watching it, everybody was hearing about it. You could not avoid it. I mean, you would have had to walk through your day with a blindfold, holding your ears and making noise with your mouth so nobody would tell you, because Who Shot JR had really become a kind of an American folk utterance. It was a mantra. And in many ways, Who Shot JR was what brought people to Dallas, which means the huge audience that Dallas subsequently got was actually after that Who Shot JR season.
Who's there?
I remember vaguely Who Shot JR. It was such a big thing, and that was my earliest memory because everybody was talking about it. Even the 9 o'clock news announced who pulled the trigger.
After JR was shot, which is the pinnacle moment in defining what a popular series this became, the torch was passed to the 1980s. Everything became bigger, better, fancier. And this really did coincide with the election of Ronald Reagan and the economic recovery for America and the glitziness of that.
What really seemed to get people watching, what really sort of helped with the word of mouth thing, was Terry Wogan, who is, I guess, the closest British equivalent to Johnny Carson in the States. And he had, and still has, a morning radio show with a huge listenership. And he started watching Dallas and saying, isn't it funny, isn't it bizarre that you've got this show about 7 fully grown multimillionaires who all seem to live in this, fairly small house together.
Most people saw the show as an exaggerated view of American life. Of course, people loved the lifestyle, the flashy clothes, the cars, living on a ranch. But beyond that, I think people saw it for what it was. I don't think people thought that all Americans were going around shooting their husbands or locking people away in sanitariums.
It's funny, I was studying abroad during part of my college years, and people with very much a serious face would ask if my limousine driver would drive me to school every day when I was in high school. They would ask me about Dallas with a very straight face, the city. Oh, everybody lives in like South Fork. It's funny what Americans put forward in their TV show. Other cultures see as a norm for America. Certainly not the case.
It's interesting because Dallas is always remembered as being visually a kind of very 80s show, very sort of glamorous and glitz and all big hair and all this sort of thing. But if you actually look at the first 5 or 6 years of the show, all of the characters are dressed comparatively, conservatively. But what you do get is the emergence of the shoulder pad. And I remember when JR and Sue Ellen got remarried, some of the British media said, well, she looks like a very attractive American footballer, because she had these enormous shoulder pads, which we weren't used to seeing at that time.
Oh, Sue Ellen, you look beautiful. Just beautiful.
I know that America thought, oh, that's great, those big shoulder pads. So in some degree, Dallas reflected what baby boom women were doing at the time, returning to work, wearing suits, but also in the society, dances, the balls, that kind of thing. Those were things that Americans would see and try and emulate in their own personal wardrobes.
Dallas did have an effect on consumer fashions of the late 70s into the early 80s, because a lot of the clothes were actually real clothes. They were garments that were bought at department stores. They were not custom made for each of the stars, which means that any of the consumers seeing something on Sue Ellen could go out and actually buy, if not the identical garment, something very, very similar. It was actually in the stores at the same time that the series was in play. So it made the show very realistic to individuals.
I think it's really interesting in an old show like Dallas that's been off the air for, I don't know what it is, 15, 16 years, in that the interest in the show almost seems to feed the internet interest, and the internet interest feeds the show.
When the website started, we had absolutely no idea how big the fan base was online. It was a complete shock. I mean, it became huge. We didn't really expect that many. The show had been off the air for like 6 years at that point. So, it was amazing to see that there's such a big, strong, fan base out there.
I think what tends to happen with pop culture is it kind of goes in cycles. And in order for something to be remembered, it has to be forgotten, first of all. And for the whole of the 90s, I knew no one that even seem to remember Dallas or know anything about Dallas or like Dallas. I thought I was the only one. And then I come to the internet, I mastered the internet, and I found there's hundreds of them out there. So it came as a real surprise to realise that it still had a huge interest, which seems to then have mushroomed with, especially in the States, with the reruns on SoapNet and now the DVDs coming out and all the interest in the film project. It just seems to build and build and build.
It's so tempting, of course, to say Dallas was a reflection of its time, that it was a mirror of American society, because not only was it about rich, powerful people, the whole show was kind of excessive, conspicuous consumption. But you know, in the end, I think a show like Dallas would have done perfectly well if it would have been in the early 70s, if it would have been in the 60s, if they played it now.
I think that the success of Dallas really comes down to those characters, though, the cast members that acted in those shows. Each and every one of them took the writing and made those characters their own. And the writers were wonderful, the cast members were, it was the perfect storm.